Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Timey-Wimey Tuesday. Today we continue the story-by-story reviews of the classic series with story number 2, The Daleks. Yes, the one that turned it from a moderate success into a full-blown nationwide sensation. Took Britain by storm. Dalek mania exploded everywhere. It was all about the Daleks, man. And this is where it all happened. Right here, right now. The story number 2, The Daleks. Today, on Timey Wimey Tuesday, on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. Now, when Sidney Newman had given the assignment of Doctor Who to budding producer Verity Lambert, one of his very strict mandates was no bug-eyed monsters. He wanted this to be a serious science fiction show for kids to teach them about history through the miracle of time travel. And so what happens? The second story in the series crosses his desk, and he's like, "What the hell is this? I said no bug-eyed monsters. What's going on here?" But Verity Lambert, bless her tenaciousness, convinced him. He said, "No. This is not monsters. This isn't aliens and stuff. The Daleks were originally people, and they were mutated by radiation, and they have to live in these metal casings in order to survive the radiation and stuff." And he just kind of begrudgingly went like, I don't know, but he let it go. And plus, they didn't have any other stories ready to go, so they had no choice. It was either go with the Dalek story, or that was the end of the series right there. So he begrudgingly allowed it to go ahead, and they made the Daleks. Now, Terry Nation, who wrote it, it's a 7-part story. He was asked if he wanted to write, for the show, and he said, well, we got some history stories, and we got some science fiction stories, and he says, well, I'll do the science fiction one. It's like, okay, cool. So he was given the assignment to do the first science fiction story. 7-part story. He wrote 1 episode per day. So he wrote the whole thing in a week. That's amazing. And he had this wonderful allegory for nuclear annihilation and radiation sickness and stuff like that. Just a wonderful, straight-up story that also had the adventure. To me, the Daleks story has always had the feel of the classic movie serials. I mean, it's one of the early stories that really feels like a movie serial to me, because each episode kind of has its own little focus, like its own little quest or point to it that is more or less resolved, or it gets to the cliffhanger point by the end of the episode, then it's resolved quickly at the beginning of the next episode. So it very much has the feel and structure of a classic movie serial, and that's one of the things I've always loved about it. And it, for being 7 parts, it's actually a pretty fast-paced story. Like still to this day, I find when I watch it, it just sucks me in to the story. I love the fact that we have the relationship between the TARDIS crew is still quite tense, because Ian and Barbara are still dealing with the fact that they were uprooted from their lives and just kind of dragged along for adventures with the Doctor and Susan, essentially against their will, and they're still kind of coming to terms with that. And there's some great confrontational moments, in particular between Ian and the Doctor, where they just have it out with various things, talking about how he says, "You uprooted us violently from our lives," and he's like, "You forced your way into my TARDIS. Don't give me that." And it's just one really heated, passionate exchanges of dialogue and character development. They're just fantastic, and I love how honestly all the actors portray the characters in this. Like this is the thing that I think has always worked really well about Classic Who, and why it endures so well to this day. It's not about the budget. It's not about spectacle. It's about characters. It's about dialogue. It's about interesting stories. And the actors in it, right from story 1, I think I talked about this a bit in the Unearthly Child review, was they invested themselves completely in these characters and these scenes and the dialogue and everything, and just played it straight. They just took it seriously, played it straight, and it works. It works so beautifully because of that. Because they are taking it seriously and they are playing it straight, you as a viewer become a lot more invested in what they're saying and what's happening to them. And the Daleks is a prime example of that, because here they've had their first little adventure, narrow escape, they got out by the skin of their teeth, and now they're thrust into this just crazily dangerous situation. They have to deal with radiation sickness, they have to deal with the Daleks trying to kill them, they deal with just the perils of the environment. I mean, creatures in the swamp trying to kill them, trying not to fall down a massive crevice in the middle of a dark, dank cave, and there's just so much peril in this. Again, exemplifying the fact that time travel is freaking dangerous. And it's just great. I love it. I love this story so much. Now, being such a huge, influential story, it has been presented in several forms over the years. The novelization was actually the very first Doctor Who novelization ever. In fact, here's the original novelization, not published by Target. Target's edition is actually a reprint. The original novel was actually published in 1965, actually barely a year after it originally aired. And being the first ever Doctor Who novel, it does take some liberties with the story. I mean, obviously, at the time, it wasn't intended to adapt every single story. They were just kind of doing a select few of them. So they did the Daleks, and then, like a year later, they did the Crusaders, they did the Zarbi, and that was basically it. They did those 3 First Doctor adventures, and then that was it. They were done. But then Target picked up the license, reprinted those 3, not initially, they did it a little later into their run, and then carried on adapting every single story in the entire classic series, minus a few that they had trouble getting the rights for. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between the novel and the televised version. I know in the first review I did for An Unearthly Child, I read a few little excerpts from the story, from the novel, because I thought it was just an interesting thing to do. I'm actually not going to do that with the Daleks, for the simple reason that there are so many differences that I would just end up reading the whole novel to you. So suffice it to say, there's a ton of differences, and this one has actually been reprinted yet again recently, in the recent Target reprint line. So you can pick it up fairly cheap if you want to check it out for yourself. And I definitely recommend checking it out. It's actually a really fun book, and I enjoyed it a lot. And the things that it adds to the story are interesting. It's to me, it's like looking at an alternate universe version of the story, because it plays out like as if it's their first adventure. So it actually the first about 30 pages present a very different origin story of how the original TARDIS crew actually came to be together. Of course, in the original televised version, the TARDIS was in the junkyard, and Barbara and Ian were Susan's teachers, and they were, wondering what was going on with her. It was kind of weird. They wanted to follow her home, see what's going on, what's her home life like, what's her grandfather like, and we all know that story. In this version, however, Ian and Barbara don't actually know each other. Barbara is a teacher. Ian is, I think he's also a teacher, but he works at actually a different school, and he's kind of working on other aspects of trying to get his career going. And so he doesn't know Barbara, he doesn't know Susan, he doesn't know anything about it. So where they meet up is he's on his way somewhere in the fog, and encounters Barbara in the middle of the road. She's been in a car accident. And there's a semi-truck which is overturned, and the driver's dead, and Barbara's car is crashed and off the road, and she informs me, she says, "Yeah, I was driving Susan home, and this truck just came out of nowhere, and we had a crash," and it's all very mysterious as to the circumstances. And what's later revealed is that Barbara had been pressuring Susan to allow her to tutor her at home, because some of her homework was really bad, and it used to be really good, now it wasn't so bad, and she wanted to meet her grandfather. And a similar kind of vibe to what the reasoning was for everything, everybody kind of being pushed towards meeting the Doctor, but a very different set of circumstances. So Ian meets up with the Doctor in the fog, and he just sees this match light coming towards him in the fog, and the light doesn't seem to be waning or wavering at all. It just seems to be pretty steady, and then it turns out to be the Doctor. And I'm picturing this in my mind, so, like cinematically, just the Doctor appearing for the first time, emerging out of this thick London fog, just holding a match. Maybe the flickering matchlight on his face. He's looking kind of slyly at Ian. And he's being very mysterious and just kind of, doesn't even care so much about the accident and such. But anyway, long story short, they end up in the TARDIS and they go off. And, it plays out very similarly from there. The difference is they don't go off to caveman times, they go off to Skaro. And that's their first adventure together. Some other differences, let me think here. There's quite a few. One of the big ones, actually, is the entire novel is told from Ian's perspective. It's actually written in the first person, as if it's Ian's own sort of memoirs of what happened. And that's an interesting way to do it. In some ways it's good because we get a lot more of kind of Ian's insight into the strangeness and such, and he's very much the eyes and ears of the reader in that respect. The downside of that is because it's all from Ian's perspective, we miss out on a lot of stuff that we actually see in the televised version. Like, for example, there's all those scenes in the televised version where we see the Daleks scheming and plotting and planning and sort of what they're up to. We don't see any of that in this, because it's all from Ian's perspective. One thing they did, I was wondering how they were going to do it, was when Susan goes off to the TARDIS to get the radiation medicine to them for them. In the show, of course, we see her. We go with her and see her go to the TARDIS and everything. In this one, we don't. She just goes off and then she comes back. And then she recounts the story of what happened. So that's how we get that perspective. But they can't do that with everything. I mean, for things that involved other characters like that, sure, you can do that. But for the most part, there's stuff missing because it's all told from Ian's perspective. Now, all the blanks are filled in over the course of the story, but it is considerably different. Another big difference is when they first meet the Daleks. Now, in the televised version, we first see the Daleks. Well, we see a Dalek plunger, and we get Barbara's just iconic scream when she sees them for the first time, and then that's where the episode ends. In this case, Barbara just kind of disappears. They're looking for her. They don't know where she is. We only see it from Ian and the Doctor and Susan's perspective because that's who we're with, or rather, that's who Ian's with. And then they meet up with Barbara. But so the first time we see the Daleks in the book, is when the Doctor, Ian, and Susan meet them, when they're confronted in the corridor by a group of them, and then Ian gets shot and stuff like that. So it plays out very differently. Another thing was the Thals, sort of who's important in the Thals, like who the main Thal characters are. In the televised version, it was primarily Aladon, obviously, and Ganatus were the two sort of big main Thals, and then Aladon's girlfriend, Dionyse. I can't remember now. Anyway, you know who I mean. His girlfriend is kind of an important character. And then, of course, there's Antidus, who is Ganatus's brother. And there we go. And then there's also Christus. Now, Christus, in the show, is only mentioned by name maybe once or twice in the whole thing, and is not a major character. In the book, however, he's like one of the main Thals, and becomes Ian's best friend. Like, they have a really, tight relationship and are good friends. And there's a lot about how Christus was really large. He was a very big, almost giant of a man. And, there's the scene where they have to jump the chasm, and Christus comes across, and Ian kind of jokes with them and says, yeah, maybe we should have just laid you across the chasm and we could have walked across you. And they have a good laugh about it. But there's all these little moments with Christus and Ian. And when I went and watched the it's like I don't remember that character and that sort of relationship dynamic. And then I watched the show. It's like, well, that's why it's not in the show. Christus, the character, is in the show, and yes, he's a big man, but he doesn't figure into it very prominently. So I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe that is if that's from an early draft of the script. Maybe there was more there with that character. I don't know. The book was written by David Whitaker, who was the story editor at the time. For whatever reason, Terry Nation never novelized any of his own stories. Maybe he was a better scriptwriter than a novel writer. But who knows? But anyway, David Whitaker wrote the story. Another difference was when they're going through the swamp leading up to the caverns, and they encounter the creatures in the swamp. Now, in the televised version, obviously they were very hampered by budget and couldn't do a lot with the creatures there. In the book, however, they go take it to the next level, where there's not just that weird sort of octopus thing with light up eyes. No, there are huge freaking predators in there that are not only trying to eat whoever comes anywhere near the shore, but are also eating each other and such. They describe like seeing huge shadows moving, like as they're climbing up the side of the mountain, they're seeing huge shadows down in the water down below, and stuff like that. You get a much greater sense of peril with that swamp and just how dangerous it is, and just if you go anywhere near it, something's going to eat you. And they go into a lot more detail with that in the book than they and do more with it than they ever could have in the show at the time. So that was pretty cool. That was a nice treat. Now, for the most part, the main beats of the story play out the same in the book as they do in the televised version. One of the big differences, though, is in the TV version they make a big point of the fact that it's radiation sickness. The Daleks need radiation to survive. It's all about radiation. You know, radioactive fallout from the neutron wars. But in the book, for whatever reason, it's never referred to as radiation. It's only ever referred to as pollution. I don't know why that change was made. It was 2 years later, was radiation no longer considered contemporary enough? Like, I don't understand why that change was made. But, yeah, so they only ever refer to it as pollution. The Daleks need pollution. They're sick from the pollution and the poisoned air full of pollution. You know, so that part kind of threw me off because I'm so accustomed to it being all about the radiation. So I don't know, weird kind of thing. What else? Well, I should mention Doctor Who and the Daleks, the 1966 movie featuring Peter Cushing as Doctor Who. A different take on the story again. In this case, we have an extremely condensed version of the story. We have this epic 2.5-hour, 7-part televised story condensed down to about 90 minutes. Yeah, so needless to say, things move at a pretty good clip, and things that take their time in the show are kind of rushed through in the movie. One of the examples that springs to mind is when they encounter that petrified creature in the petrified forest, and they're not sure if it's alive or not. In the show, they take their time. They're looking at it. It's a beautiful model, by the way, like beautiful sculpture. That creature, the metal creature, really, really cool. I always really liked that design. And they're examining it, and they're poking it, and they're prodding it, and they're just, figuring it out. In the movie, Ian kind of trips and falls on it, and it crumbles away to dust. It's not made of metal like it is in the show. It's just a petrified creature that's basically turned to stone, and Ian falls on it and smashes it to pieces. It's like, oh, well, I guess it's dead. And then that's it. It's like 30 seconds to deal with this thing. And another big change. Holy crap. Antodus lives. Yeah. It plays it, where they're jumping a chasm, and Antodus slips and falls in the televised version, and he's almost pulling Ian and Ganadus down with him, and then he cuts the rope to cut himself free. It's a very dramatic, powerful moment in the show, and it's really, gut-wrenching, like emotionally gut-wrenching. It was a pretty harsh moment. Well, so it all plays out the same in the movie until he calls up from the bottom of the crowd. He's like, hey, can you guys get me out of here? He's alive. Somehow he survived falling hundreds of feet into the crevice below. I guess the producers of the movie just didn't have the heart to kill him. But yeah. Well, I love that just generally the story arc with Ganatus and Antidus, the fact that Ganatus is very protective of his brother. And whenever anybody says anything bad about him or about him being a coward, he's like, no, he's very brave. He's the bravest man I know. And like he jumps to his defense. Like he's just such a good brother to him and really tries to help him throughout the whole thing. But Antidus is just too much a victim to his own fear. I mean, he's just paralyzed with fear from everything. Like when they're in the swamp and the one guy gets killed, and they just see what's left, just like the empty, the water gourds and stuff like that. And he's just looking like, what happened? He's just like freaking out, and he's like, well, we'll never know, so let's just go before the same thing happens to one of us. And then, of course, when he's crossing when they're going into the caverns, and he's like, I can't go. I'm just going to turn back. And it's like, you can't turn back. It's like, well, I have to turn back. And he's about to go, and then the cavern collapses, so he can't go. But then, and they have to press on. And and then the whole scene with the cavern, the chasm rather, where he just can't bring himself to jump over it. And I mean, Ian is very, understanding and as diplomatic as he can be. Like, he throws the rope at first, and Antidus he's just kind of like zoned out with fear. Just lets the rope hit him, and it falls. And Ian's just so nice about it. He's like, sorry, that was my fault. Bad throw, and he's does it again. And just a great scene. I love the way that whole thing plays out. And the other thing is, I love the fact that, I mean, they spend almost the whole damn episode jumping that chasm. And you'd think that would get really boring, but it doesn't. It just, yes, it goes on and on, but it's leading up to that moment when Antidus is going to jump. That's what it's building up to. And the building up of that is done so well. I really got to commend the directors of that. There was 2 directors, by the way, on this one. The first few episodes were directed by Christopher Barry, and the last couple episodes were directed by Richard Martin. I don't remember exactly where the split was, but yeah, they talk about that in the commentary. They actually have both of them on the commentary track. It's not every episode that has a commentary. I think it's episodes 2, 4, and 7, if I remember correctly. So there's only like 3 episodes that have commentaries, unfortunately. But they got Verity Lambert on there, and they got William Russell and Carol Ann Ford and Richard Martin and Christopher Barry. And it's moderated once again by Gary Russell. So very, very interesting and insightful commentaries. As always, it's great to hear just everything they went through to make these shows back then, and just the having to work around the budget and the studio limitations and things like that. But yeah, they talk about how they both had kind of different styles, and Richard Martin sort of came in to do the last few episodes, and so they were asking him, like, did you sit in on any of Christopher Barry's sessions or watch the dailies or whatever, to sort of get a feel for what he was doing? He says, yeah, I think I must have looked at some of it just to kind of get an idea, and then and then also did kind of his own things as well. But yeah, great stuff. I love the job that they did on that. And then, of course, the design of the Daleks, very simple, very iconic. I mean, the only sort of thing that Ray Kuzik had to go by was Terry Nation's very sparse description. In fact, he mentions in one of the featurettes about the making of the show that he said very often in Terry Nation's scripts, it would be they walk into a white featureless room. And he said he kept seeing this. Why is everything... So he asked him, he says, why is everything a white featureless room? And he said, oh, well, that's because I'm not very good at technical stuff. I figured you guys can just, make up whatever and make it interesting. So I mean, that's the way Terry Nation would write, apparently, is he would just leave the design work up to the designers, and he would just focus on the story, like the story, the characters, the dialogue, the plot. And well, in this case, the allegory and things like that, and leave the design work to the designers. So he was like, okay, I'll go with that. So as far as the design of the Daleks go, I mean, again, the mandate was very simple, was that it was a robot that was legless and did not look like a man in a suit. So, and he was inspired by these Georgian dancers or something that would just kind of, they'd have the big bustle, and they just kind of, it would look like they glide across the floor, like they just move their feet very, very daintily. So it looked like they were gliding across the floor, and he liked that idea. So he wanted something like that for it, and that's kind of where the impetus for the Dalek design came from. Originally, the sink plunger originally apparently was not going to be a sink plunger. It's just, again, budgetary limitations. It's kind of all they had on hand. I think originally they wanted it to be more of a claw, something that could grab things. In the movie, actually, Doctor Who and the Daleks, they do have, like, some of them have the plunger, some of them have a claw. So they actually were able to do that in the movie. I should mention also the movie. I know I'm kind of jumping around, but whatever. It's all good. You can follow. You guys are smart. But in the movie, it's not the Doctor. It's Doctor Who. His actual name is Doctor Who. Ian is not a school teacher, nor is Barbara. Barbara is the Doctor's granddaughter. Susan is the Doctor's other granddaughter. Doctor Who's granddaughter. And Ian is Barbara's boyfriend. Oh, which actually I should mention, another aspect of the book. There's a hint towards the end of the story that Barbara kind of has a thing for Ian. And Ian kind of picks up on that and wonders where it might go later in their travels. So, yeah, that's something that will never be developed ever. So, as I say, I mean, they weren't intending to novelize all of them. They just kind of did their one thing, and that was it. And then they did more novels. I haven't read the other novels from that sort of trilogy of novels that they did, so I don't know if they kind of expand on those aspects or not, or if they just kind of do their own thing. I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. I'm reading them all in story order, so... yeah. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention was just the characters being invested, and just really palpable emotion. There's that wonderful scene where the Daleks need someone to go and retrieve the medical supplies, and Ian really wants to be the one to go, but his legs are still paralyzed. They're not working. He can walk a little bit, but not enough to be able to, go through the jungle. And he's like, you got to give me more time. I don't have my legs back yet. And it's like, no, you have to go now. And, Susan is like freaking out, and Barbara's like just zoned. She can't go. So there's no dialogue in this moment. And watching it again, I realized just how perfect it was. And what an amazing actor William Russell is, and why I just adore his portrayal of Ian so much, is he looks at Barbara, and she's like, He looks at the Doctor, and he's passed out. Like, he's like borderline dying from radiation sickness. And then he just very slowly turns to Susan, because he knows there's no choice. And you can see it in his face. Like, he does not want to say it. He does not want to ask her. She's just a kid. He doesn't want to send her out into this dangerous situation. But they all know. Both Ian and Susan know in that moment there is no choice. They have to go and get that medicine, because they will die. And if they don't die from it, the Daleks will kill them if they don't go and get the medicine. So there's just no choice. And I just love how that little moment plays out with little to no dialogue. It's just all the expressions on their faces. What a great, great bunch of actors the original TARDIS crew was. Just amazing. I don't know what else I can say. The Daleks is fantastic, and there's so much good about it. It's no wonder that it was the one that made the series get, the recognition that it had, and cemented it as a hit. So, yeah, it would be about another year before we'd see the Daleks again in the absolutely superb Dalek invasion of Earth. But we got quite a few stories to go before we get there. So next up will be story number 3, The Edge of Destruction. By the way, I was going to say, I didn't really say anything from the Key to Time this week, did I? Let's just take a quick peek here. I don't think there's very much here, to be honest. Well, there's some pretty nice pictures. There you go. The Daleks. Very nice. Gotta love it. Honestly, there's not much in this about, funny enough, about the Daleks that I haven't already said. And then here we got a lovely picture of William Hartnell at the TARDIS console, hard at work, concentrating intensely. Awesome. Alrighty, well, I think that is it for this week, folks, for the story-by-story reviews. Hope you enjoyed it. A lot to cover. There's a lot of different versions of this story. I definitely recommend checking out the DVD. Yeah, so in this case, the Daleks is on disc 2. I should mention, if you have this set, it's entirely possible your discs 2 and 3 are mislabeled. Mine are, and apparently a lot of other people's are too. Don't think that was a problem on the Region 2 set. Seems to be only on the Region 1 set. All the disc contents are there. It's just for whatever reason they swapped the labels on discs 2 and 3. So the one that says that it's Edge of Destruction is actually the Daleks, and vice versa. So in terms of contents, I mean, the Daleks is a 7-part story, so obviously they wanted to use most of the disc space just for the story. So the only real extra of note on there is Creation of the Daleks, which is an 18-minute featurette. And as I mentioned, they've got 3 commentaries on there. They've also got a photo gallery as well, which is quite cool. I really like looking at the photo galleries, especially from these early ones, because you often see rare color photographs from the show that give you a look at what the sets looked like back then and stuff like that. It's really, really cool. Anyway, that is it for this week. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next week for part 2 of my Prisoners of Time review, the Maxi series that celebrated the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who in comic book form. Really good stuff. Be sure to check that out, and then I'll see you again in 2 weeks for my review of story number 3, Edge of Destruction. Alrighty. Quick thank you to my Patreon sponsors. Hey, Patreon sponsors, thank you! Especially big thanks to my 2 highest level sponsors, Kyle Pellegrini and Get Your Gorgeous On, the wonderful e-mag maintained by Michelle O'Toole and Simon Hedger. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate the support. Keep being awesome. Alrighty, that is it from me to you for now. So until next time, thanks for watching, and sayonara. Oh my god, I'm blanking on all the names. I just said his name. Ganatus and Antidus.